At a time when we're losing our oldest and most precious trees and forests from around the world, I'm curious to understand if and why this matters to all of us. Welcome to the Meaning of Trees podcast. I'm Tom Hill, and it's here that I meet with people from all walks of life to explore the answers to one essential question. What do trees mean to you? Kevin Chase is a forest entomologist and a researcher with Bartlett Tree Experts that grew up in the Appalachian mountains of Pennsylvania. The various academic studies that he's been a key part of in his field have mainly focused on the behaviours of tree-dependent scale insects, such as caterpillars, bark beetles, and other invasive and wood-boring animals. He completed a Ph.D. in ecological philosophy in New Zealand a while back, and we'll hear about one of the fascinating core concepts he delved into in that period of his life a bit later in the episode. I met Kevin a couple of years ago, just after he arrived in England, and we quickly struck up a partnership between Bartlett's UK lab and several National Trust gardens in the southeast as part of my trees and woodlands consultancy work with the Trust. With earthworms very much at the heart of our collaboration and friendship, we thought it would be a nice idea to meet up for a chat at a place where worm appreciation has long been a topic under discussion. Kevin, welcome to the Meaning of Trees podcast. How are you doing?
I'm lovely. Thanks so much for having me, Tom.
We're at Leaf Hill Place today, which was a place that Charles Darwin used to come and study worms. And we've seen the worm stone that was installed here in the grounds 180 years ago. And we've been on a tour with Catherine, who works for National Trust. Shout out to Catherine. Thank you for a great tour. My mind is alive with inspiration. How about yours?
My mind is just buzzing and just thinking about the history of this place and who walked through here and really trying to get into Darwin's mind and his footsteps on this place. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, just to name check another famous person. So Vaughan Williams, the composer of Lark Ascending, used to live here. So Kevin's had a go on his piano earlier, which was pretty cool. And also Hans Zimmer came through this house as a student of music, which is just incredible.
Yeah, playing drums in the basement.
Before I get too much carried away on a side branch though, let's get a wiggle on and start with, what do trees mean to you, Kevin?
Of course, I love this question. I'm so glad that you asked everybody this. If I had to use only one word, the word would be home. Having grown up in the Appalachian Mountains of Pennsylvania, trees are just everything to me. So it really is the connection with my family, and it's the feeling of being in a place that feels like home.
I love that. So how you've learned to think and feel about trees and essentially take on a career that's been inspired by them. I'm wondering, what was the spark for you that really kind of got your tree fascination going?
Oh, man. So I was a really poor secondary high school student. I was just this punk ass skateboard kid that that's all I cared about was skateboarding, a girlfriend here and there. But after that, this is gonna get pretty personal. Is that okay? So my dad overdosed on heroin, right after I graduated high school. He survived, thank goodness. And to this day, he's clean. Dad, I'm very proud of you. I love you so much, and I'm really proud of where you're at now. But there was a whole year of, staying home, helping my mom, and then this time to reflect of what do I want to do going forward. I made some other one direction that just didn't work out. And when I came back to Pennsylvania, I thought, what did I love to do as a kid? What was the thing? And if that love can translate into a job, what would that be? And it was this flashback to me climbing trees. Specifically, there was 2 hemlock trees in our backyard that they got hemlock leodelgid, a non-native species that kills trees. The reason that these trees probably died was because my brother and I rode our bikes around these trees, and my mom was a childminder, or she had a daycare, as we say in the States. And so there was kids running across this soil and compacting the soil so much. So yes, we had this non-native species come in, but actually I think it was us that killed the tree. And I've only thought of that recently. When I've started thinking more about the soil, like it's like, yes, these non-native species can be bad, but also what's the impact that we had as kids? So that was kind of a punch in my own gut when I thought about that. But yeah, so climbing those trees, and then I used to put grasshoppers in terrariums and listen to them go to sleep. I was the kid putting bumblebees in coffee cans. I was the kid that would go out as it's raining at nighttime and listening to the frogs croak, the spring peepers croak at night, and looking for those insects. And so I found out that entomology is a real job and that studying trees is a real job. And I I just immediately found this passion. I went back to school for a very long time through undergraduate, master's, PhD, and a postdoc, and eventually found my way to this company that I'm at now, Bartlett Tree Experts, where I get to combine my love of insects, my love of trees, and my love of people, and talk to people about how we manage trees in the urban environment and how we manage these non-native insects. And the closest family member for me would be my brother, as far as the connection to trees. So he actually also works for the same company, Bartlett Tree Experts, where he's an arborist representative. That's the sales force of our company in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And every day we talk about trees. We talk about the trees we're seeing, how they're faring, what new trees are being planted, and just our relationship with them. And I think for my whole family, when we all get together, it usually is somewhere around trees.
Yeah.
So it's so special to be have that relationship with trees and with my family.
Thank you so much for sharing that because I appreciate, yeah, you've given quite a bit of yourself in that answer. And yeah, just to say, appreciate that.
Absolutely.
I know you work for Bartlett Tree Experts, okay? And in the modern era, the term expert can be kind of loaded,
Yes, it
right?
can be.
Now, I know this is a company that's been around since 1907,
Yes.
so it's got, a long history. But I wanted to ask you, in your mind, what is a tree expert today in the modern times?
Wow. Yeah. What a question. Um, I think part of the answer is humans. So understanding how to manage a tree, it always comes down to the objective of the human that you're talking to. If we filled this room with 15 more people and we asked everybody, what does a tree mean to you? I think a better question is if we went to an individual tree and say, what does this tree mean to you? We would all probably have very different answers. And then if we said, okay, this tree gets a non-native insect or a pathogen, or the soil is really poor, how would you manage this? Everybody would have a different answer to that. So my job as a tree expert is for me to gather as much information as I can, both from a pure scientific way and from an understanding of how that culture or that group of people or that individual wants to manage that tree, and be able to give them all of the options. So we were talking about consulting earlier. So the job of a consultant is not to say this is the answer; it's to say these are all the possible solutions to get to an answer that you're asking about. So it's just being as informed as possible. And part of what I love about this job is I'm never going to know everything. Bruce Frederick, who was our previous lab director in Charlotte, North Carolina, he's retired now. But my first day on the job, he said, Kevin, welcome. Great to have you. I just want to let you know, I've been doing this job for a long time, and trees will always make a liar out of you. And he said that, and he gave a couple examples of, I went to this property and I looked at them and I told them in the eyes, this tree will be dead in 2 years. It has all of these problems, it has all of these issues. The soil is so bad. And 5 years later, I go back and that tree is still there. And then I look at somebody and say, this tree is very healthy. You have nothing to worry about in this time frame, we'll say 5 years. You have zero concerns. And then it falls over the next day. I think those were pretty, rare, pretty few and far between. But it was a really good point that, we can gather as much information as we can. But I mean, trees don't have mouths. They can't talk to us. And even when we go to doctors and they ask the question of how are you feeling, how honest can we be and how much do we know ourselves and how much biology do we know about ourselves to even be able to express that to a doctor? So I don't know, being a tree expert is just being able to confidently say, this is the information I have. This is what I can predict based on previous experience of what we've observed across North America and the UK and New Zealand for myself. This is what I think the best solution is, and here's a whole bunch of other options. But then really diving and trying to get an understanding of what the other person wants to achieve.
So you're sat here with the Earthworm Society of Britain badge on.
I
Okay.
am, yes,
You are officially an advocate for
I
earthworms,
am.
right? What's so good about them?
Oh man, what's not good about them? I think they're a very charismatic group of organisms. The way that they move, I love how they're slimy. I love that they have more than one heart. I love the changes that they can make, right? So it's thrown around a lot, but they're ecosystem engineers. They're literally engineering the ground beneath our feet. And so when I think about on a global scale where earthworms are at and the changes that they can make and how important they are, I don't think we can underestimate how important they are, and how they should be supported and how much energy and effort we as humans should put into understanding them a bit better so that we can support them a lot more.
I know that earthworms were a topic really close to Charles Darwin's heart as well. And he studied them for 40 years, was it, and described them as the intestines of the earth.
Yeah.
So why are trees and earthworms so interrelated?
That's a good question. It really, I think it comes down to what's in the soil. And for trees, the soil is where all the getting's good and where they're getting their moisture and where they're getting so much of their nutrients. Yes, they're producing the photosynthetates from the sun, but almost everything else is coming from the soil. And that soil is their home. And this interaction within the home for trees and for the earthworms, I think there's just this beautiful mutualism that can exist. And so when we think about planting trees on the urban environment, when you have what we call soil, which is alive, I would call it dirt, is something that's not alive. So when you have dirt that doesn't have these earthworms, doesn't have the microbial community, it doesn't have the mycorrhizae, it doesn't have that living structure, can we really call that a good home for a tree? And I think, there's a reason that we see so many young trees transplanted in the urban environment that don't survive. There's a lot of reasons for that, but I think one of the major reasons is because there isn't a home. There isn't actual soil. We just have dirt.
Yeah, and soil biology and soil generally is just so precious, and I'm sure you have a really great understanding of how long it takes for it to form. And that
Mm.
wormstone we've just seen earlier on today, yeah, what were your sort of reflections there?
Oh gosh. I Part of it was, this beautiful image of Darwin walking around and with his family. Did they stand on that stone and did they contemplate of, what's beneath me? Thinking about, the different species that have moved through there, thinking, maybe about a massive rainstorm coming through and imagining all the earthworms coming up, because that's what happens when it rains really heavily. They come up out of that soil and imagining them, crawling around that stone. And just thinking about the patience of Charles Darwin, that, he put this stone on the earth and then literally watched it. What happens to that stone over time? And the fact that he was measuring how far it sank over these long periods of time and what impacts earthworms have on the soil, it's incredible to think.
Yeah, and getting to know you, I've learned that actually there's three main types of earthworm. Is that right?
That's correct, yes. We as biologists, we love triangles for some reasons, and same with geologists. So if you're familiar with the soil triangle, so on one side you have clay, on one side you have sand, and on one side you have silt, and then right in the middle you have this loam. It's very similar to how earthworm biologists talk about this. So yes, there's three general categories, but actually a better way to think about it is a triangle where you have your anesic earthworms. So these are uh, a nice way to say this is your uppy downy worms. So these are worms that burrow deep into the soil. They have these little mittens, which is their homes. They go up to the subsurface and they grab leaf material or organic material. They bring it down to their home, and then they decompose it there. So they're really changing the structure by taking the stuff from above. Then you have your endogeeic worms. So these are your subsurface worms that are moving horizontally through that area. And then your epigeeic worms. So these are right on the top surface, right in that duff layer where they're decomposing these leaves. So you have multiple species here in the United Kingdom. We have 29 species, 31 in the British Isles. So Ireland does have two species that haven't been recorded here yet. And I say yet because I think maybe there's some exciting news coming soon from the Earthworm Society. But we have all of these species, and they don't perfectly fit into being an anesic or an endogeeic worm. They might be somewhere in the middle where, they're living throughout to the subsurface a bit deeper. So, but it's a nice way to break that biology down.
This could be the most important question of the interview.
Go for it.
If you cut a worm in half by accident, do you end up with two worms?
Oh man. Tom, I have to admit my limitations here. I've never done it and done that experiment. And my background being a true entomologist, I don't know the answer to that.
Well, funnily enough, I did a little bit of research and turns out that the front half of the worm will carry on and regenerate, actually.
Right.
So
So
then,
you have one worm and then the back half just dies off?
yeah,
Okay.
apparently
Yeah.
so.
'Cause that's where
Yeah.
all the hearts are, right? In the front
Yes.
half. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that then prompts me to ask you, because I was thinking about what title to give you in this podcast episode, right? So it could be Bartlett's Tree Expert, could be one. It could be Entomologist, which we'll go into some of that in a minute. But I was thinking about Worm Expert, and I also knew you'd be a little uncomfortable with that. So maybe I might go for Worm Enthusiast now that you've failed that question.
I did fail. My lab director is going to be very disappointed. So, John Banks, I know you want me to be the worm guy, but I failed the most important question. I'm sorry.
The Worm Guy, I think you can have that one.
I mean, so Emma Sherlock, Kieran Derek Brown, with the Earthworm Society, they are much more appropriate to be called the worm people. They are out there every day just talking about and praising earthworms and really, putting the flag up for earthworms. So I think they deserve it better. But I'm very grateful and humbled by being called the worm guy.
It's cool. I'll maybe lose the if you're uncomfortable with that. So it'll just be Worm Guy. Yeah.
Very good. Yeah, worm guy, not the worm guy. Perfect.
Love it.
Perfect.
Seriously, though, you've really got into worms, haven't you,
I
since
have.
you've come to the UK?
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, I've only been here for a little over 2 years. And, my background's mostly invasion ecology. So when a non-native species shows up in a new environment, what impacts do they have across that ecosystem? Specifically forest entomologists, so how invasive insects impact trees. But coming here, really getting so interested in the soil, and especially urban soils, and really thinking about what are those urban soils missing. And earthworms being just one of the most lovely species to look at and think about and make decisions going forward of how do we support this important group of organisms.
So talk to me a bit more about what's brought us together.
Yeah, so the reason that we're here together is the fact that our company was really interested in how earthworms impacts and changes the structure of soil, and then your connection with the National Trust. So we formed this relationship to do some research trials to get a better understanding of what changes earthworms make. And for me, specifically, the company that I work for, we're really on the urban landscape. So, your forest soils, what we think of as a healthy soil with that nice duff layer and all that leaf litter, that really doesn't exist on the urban landscape so much. We as humans have changed soils so much. So to get a better understanding of if we incorporate earthworms into the soil, into the urban soils where they've been modified so much, what kind of changes do they make?
Yeah, so I'm going to have a go at describing our project, and then you can correct me afterwards. So we came together around the idea of trying to test some naturalistic type management approaches for recovery of ancient and veteran trees, actually. So we have got 6 sites in the southeast of England, the patch that I cover in my consultancy for National Trust, and the teams are on board there with basically testing whether wood chip mulch, earthworms, or a mixture of both might actually improve the chances for trees that have been really heavily compacted over a very long time. And so we're in the early stages of that project. And I know that you've recently been round to take some early kind of indications of where we might be heading. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah. So every 6 months, my team, a big shout out to my team. Thank you so much, research technicians. You're doing so much great work. We are taking what we call bulk density samples. So this is where we have this metal slide hammer that we bash into the ground, and we get the soil core. And then we use a 3-inch sleeve to get this 3-inch chunk of soil. We take the dry weight of that, and we have this volumetric measure of essentially how compacted the soil is. And so we're doing this every 6 months across a 3-year cycle. So we did just take our 1-year samples, and it's starting to look a little bit interesting. So, like trees, soil is alive, but in the urban environment, we can kind of think of it as less alive. And we're hoping that we start to see some of these changes of this living soil come back. And instead of just this hard brick that we walk across, that we actually have this living organism that is supporting the trees. So that's what we're hoping to see over time. And it's too early to say anything yet. We don't expect changes to happen fast in the soils, but we are starting to see a little bit of the separation between the treatments. So that's about all that I'll say with that.
No worries. I think you're staying coy on that one, but yeah, fingers crossed that at least a few of those trees really see the benefits. But yeah, with anything tree related, we have to look at things long term
Yes.
to really understand, because there'll be so many factors that could affect them, the weather of the year and such. So yeah, we're doing the best we can, but if overall we can come out with a suitable treatment, that would be fantastic. And one of the ways we're trying to monitor whether the treatments have an impact on the health of the veteran trees
Yes.
is testing their chlorophyll fluorescence as well, isn't it?
That's correct. Yeah. Yep. So another measure that we're taking, it's kind of two different measurements. It's called our SPAD meter. So this is a measure of chlorophyll content. So how much chlorophyll is in a leaf tissue. And then chlorophyll fluorescence. So this is a measure of how vigorous the tree is. And essentially what it's measuring is how, getting into plant physiology here, how efficient, that's the word, how efficient the leaves are at photosynthesis. So you have your photosystem 1 system and your photosystem 2. So it's a measurement of that photosystem 2 system of how efficient it is at photosynthesizing the light to eventually make sugars.
I noticed that you have some tattoos
Aye.
of some creepy crawlies.
Yes.
What are they about?
So this is Eriochemix formosanus. This is a sericid wood wasp. So I did my master's degree on an invasive wood wasp called Cyrus noctilio, which is actually native to Europe. It invaded the southern hemisphere across almost all the pine plantations in the south. And it showed up to New York. Gosh, how long it's been now? 25, 30 years. Don't quote me on that, around that time period. And when it first showed up, the United States Forest Service thought, what is this insect going to do? We know in the southern hemisphere, when it first showed up in Australia and New Zealand, it was really killing trees. It showed up in South Africa, it was killing trees. So there was a bit of fear that when I showed up to North America, what is this insect going to do? So I was creating some risk and hazard maps for down south. So if this insect made it to the deep south where there's, massive pine plantation forests, what could it do? So I really fell in love with this group of insects. And there's an amazing scientific illustrator named Joe McGowan, who was at Mississippi State University, and he had just drawn up this species for a scientific article. So I said, Joe, I'm about to finish my master's degree. I was studying sericid wood wasps. Can I please steal your scientific illustration and put it on my arm? So I did that. But one of the reasons I really love this insect is it is a non-native species. This is Eriochemix formosanus, and it showed up in the US, but it actually hasn't become an issue. It hasn't become a problem. And I think so many times we as an invasion ecologist, we just think that, all invasive insects are bad or all non-native species are bad. But here's one that came to America and just kind of became part of the natural environment. So it's not killing any trees. Seemingly it hasn't replaced any species. So for me, it's a good reminder that just because something is new in an environment doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be bad. And I think that's a pretty important thing to think about. And then on my left back tricep, I have a combo. So it's half a mountain pine beetle, Dendroxinus ponderosi, which is very famous for having these huge outbreaks in the West and killing trees, and then half a pine cone. So this was actually an illustration done by our lab manager at the University of Minnesota, where I did my postdoc under Brian Alkema. And she is an amazing artist as well as a great research manager. And once again, I stole the artwork from a colleague and put it on my body, but very meaningful to me.
Yeah, earlier on, we were talking about how some people find invertebrates kind of scary,
Aye.
especially if you look at them close. They definitely have an otherworldliness to them, and there's a general kind of fear about them, right?
Mm.
And you mentioned some studies at a kids camp you did that sounded really interesting in terms of the differences in gender tropes, perhaps, that might associate with those kinds of species.
Yeah, so I wouldn't call it a study. It was more of just an observation.
Yeah.
But yeah, at Mississippi State University, there's this insect camp. And you get these amazing kids that come through really from all across the country. It's become pretty famous as far as insect camps go, of course. And one observation that I made was that the young girls between the ages of 5 and 7, they were almost never afraid of insects, whereas the young boys were. And then if you brought the parents in, and typically this would be the moms, they would be the ones telling the girls that they should be afraid of the insects. Whereas the boys, they had their father figures telling them, oh, you can't be afraid of insects. So it was this really wild observation that girls are so drawn to insects, so drawn to these creepy crawlies, even these Madagascar hissing cockroaches that were loud and really large and, really had that creepy crawly thing going on. The girls would be so happy and so excited to pick them up, and the boys would be really running away from them. But then watching how, this cultural shift into parents teaching their kids to be afraid or not be afraid, and the pressures that puts on us, I think it was a real shame to watch that, to watch these girls that, were really drawn to insects to be taught how to be afraid of them. And yeah, for all the parents out there, if you're afraid of insects, I understand that, but please encourage your kids to pick up insects and, touch plants and to get out there in nature and to enjoy it.
How about your own girls? How do they find these kind of things?
My girls are the ones that are coming home from school with dirt in their fingernails. I'm so proud of my daughters. We're walking to school, and the other day, my daughter said, "The leaves are curling on that plant. There must be aphids inside." And sure enough, we uncurled those leaves, and there were certainly aphids inside. So that was, a very proud entomology father moment in my life. So, Isla, well done, baby.
Yeah, it's all about the observational skills, isn't it?
Yes, yes,
Lovely.
absolutely.
In studying entomology and ecology, I know that you've been to New Zealand and that you had a particular focus on the Allee population effect. Have
Yes.
I got that right?
Yeah, the Allee Effect. Yeah, so I did my PhD at the University of Canterbury in New Zealand, under the guidance of Dave Kelly, Eki Brockerhoff, and Sandy Leopold. So these are very important people in my life. And the Allee Effect is the idea of positive density dependence. So in ecology, we think so much about competition, how many resources there are in the environment, and how many individuals can live in that environment based on how many resources there are. The Allee effect is kind of the opposite of that. So it's the idea of cooperation. And this was brought forth by this man named Warner Clyde Allee. He was in Chicago. I think a really important part of the story is that he was a Quaker. And the Quakers, it's a religion where they believe a lot in peace, in contemplation, in meditation, and thinking. And I think that really drove his ecological theory of cooperation. So what I was doing is I was looking at if you have a new population of bark beetles coming in, for example, how many individuals does it take to establish a new population? So if you only have two, let's say, and you have one male and one female for a sexual organism, if that male goes off and that female goes off and they never meet to mate, then that population is going to crash, right? Whereas if you have 20 individuals and 10 go one way and 10 go another way and they go into a log and they do find each other and mate, well, then, are they then able to go to the next generation? So it's really thinking about that whole process of, arrival and establishment, spread, and then another establishment and how they move throughout that country. So this idea of cooperation, goes much further than just the bark beetles. It really goes towards this human ecology side too. How do we work together? How do we form communities? If we were pioneers on a new frontier, what kind of interactions do we have for us to be able to establish a new area and thrive? So it was a really lovely project to be a part of.
So circling back to our worm study,
Yes.
what kind of dynamics might we see play out there? Because one of our concerns
Yes.
was that the worms might just like wiggle off,
Bugger
right?
off. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So it has to be a good home in order for them to stay, right? So maybe we should explain how these worms are introduced. So we actually bought these cardboard boxes of worms, 250 worms, 25 of these anisic worms, Lumpricus terrestris, that go up and down, and then 225 of these endogeeic worms, the tiger worm. And we bury these boxes in the ground. And there were some places where I thought, this soil is so dry, it's so poor. And if there's a neighboring tree nearby, the next time that it rains and they're able to disperse, they're probably going to. And I think that's really where this treatment, where we have both wood chip mulch, that's providing this very slow breakdown of nutrients, that's, preserving the moisture that is there and giving this long-term food resource. This is where the earthworms are most likely to stay. So my hypothesis is that that is where we're really going to see the change, is when we're actually, introducing organisms that are making these changes within the soil, but also providing them that food resource that is lacking. If we think about the forest where you have this, leaf litter layer, and when you have so many species of trees that are, being input, that are breaking down at different rates, providing different levels of nutrients, we don't have that on the urban landscape. So we just don't have a place for these earthworms to live. So I think there could be, from an Allee Effect standpoint, these minimum numbers of earthworms that they're either not going to find each other and reproduce, or they're just going to die out before they have a chance to reproduce, or, as you say, they're going to wiggle off in search for that better home.
So, what you were sort of speaking to is how different kind of communities or species, populations are kind of almost shaped by the numbers
Mm,
or the densities,
yeah.
right? What kind of other examples might you have of that?
Yeah. Gosh. So there's what we would call a population bottleneck. So, I mean, maybe this is a good example for Darwin, because he did marry his first cousin. And we know that his children were poorly or sickly. And so we know that with greater genetic diversity, that's a huge benefit for a species. So if you have a very small number of individuals that's within a population that live in an environment, that genetic structure is not going to be very high. So this is a case in point where the more individuals that there are with greater genetic diversity, the stronger that population is going to be. So an Allee effect can play into that where, if you only have a few individuals, eventually you'll get below that Allee threshold where that population will just go towards extinction. It might take a couple generations, it might take, long periods of time, but there really isn't a lot of rebound to get above that Allee threshold unless there's more individuals that are migrated or intentionally brought into that area. So, the greatest example is the African wild dog. So, for a female that gets pregnant, there is a minimum number of males that she needs around her in order to feel protected, in order to gather enough food. And if she doesn't have this minimum number around her, then her body will naturally abort that set of pups. Which, we think of humans, oh, that's so sad. But biologically, it just works out that for this species, it's the best thing for the whole pack and it's the best thing for the future of those animals until you get more migration in from maybe another pack where, two smaller packs form together and then they're stronger by working together. So by that cooperation to gather food for protection, these females feel like they can raise the next set, the next generation.
Well, I'm going to ask you a question then that might take a little moment to think about,
Okay.
but it seems that that kind of philosophy towards ecology or that approach has been something you've probably brought into your way of viewing the world. And so if we were going to kind of take a look at human populations in that respect, what would be your reflections through that lens?
Wow. Yeah, that's a really good question. I might take a moment to think about that.
Yeah.
So my first thought immediately is, I mean, kind of, it goes towards racism of, we are one species. And yes, we have different colors of skin and different colors of hair and different color of eyes. But for so much of human history, we have segregated each other and put each other in different parts of the world and looked down on, a different people group or different culture and said that we can't work with them, that we have to compete with them, or that we are different from them. And really, we're just one species trying to live on this planet. And it's time to learn how to cooperate with each other, with our own species. And a huge side effect of that is going to be taking care of other species. I think in our competition with each other, within our own species, we've destroyed so many other species. And I think if we can get past some of this fear and some of these feelings and our ability to not cooperate, we'll live in a better world.
And I guess that leads me to the fact that you're about to leave the UK actually
Mm,
after a couple of years here with your family, your young family as well. And I know you're going back to the US and actually close to Washington, DC as well, right?
mm.
So, yeah, what kind of things are you going to be thinking about heading back into that place?
The thing I'm thinking most about is my family. We are very fortunate to, between my partner and I, still have 4 living grandparents and all the cousins for my daughters now. My partner has 3 sisters and my brother and my sister. Um, just getting back and forming this tight family unit. So much of my family had dispersed from Pennsylvania, and now everybody's come back. So it's this lovely, really unique opportunity to see everybody again. And we haven't lived around family for 15 years. So in some ways, a little bit nervous about that, right? What are the dynamics that we're going to enter back into? But really just the true excitement of that. That's what's on my mind. That's what's on my heart. That's what I'm looking forward to.
And what have your reflections been between the kind of way that trees are thought about in the UK versus the US? Has there been any differences?
Oh, it's a really interesting question. The one word answer is yes.
Yeah.
There's very large differences. I think from an arboricultural standpoint, I would say that our standards are very different. I would say we have a lot more cowboy tree companies that are just going out there and just cutting trees. There's a little bit of that here. But at the same time, the idea of pollarding trees, you see that so common here with, for example, your London plane trees. And that's something that at first startled me when I, riding the second floor of a bus going down the city where I live in Reading. And they were pollarding young plane trees. We say sycamore in the US. That's a very different thing here. It's an acer. So that's a huge difference. But then the way that you have, it's almost like a heart for older trees. So these ancient and veteran trees. Maybe it's because in the US we're such a young country, so we admire the large and the huge, we have our massive sequoias and metasequoias. Here, it's more about you have your lovely old ancient oak tree or your ancient sweet chestnut tree. And there is so much value and worth put on it. And not just a money standpoint, but the ecological value of that. And I think that that understanding of the ecological value and the protection of those goes a lot further here than the US. And maybe that's because more recently we cut down almost all of our trees. I mean, the entire state of Pennsylvania was deforested, and it wasn't that long ago. So we don't have the ancient trees that you do. There are pockets, and I don't want to leave those out. But for the most part, if you go across England, in most forests, there's that one ancient or veteran tree that is just stunning. So I think between the arboricultural work and then the tree preservation side, there's huge differences.
Yeah, and Reading's a good location for some pretty epic
Yes.
ancient tree sites. Windsor's not far away, for example.
Burnham Beaches is
Yeah.
an absolutely lovely site.
I've got a really dumb question for you. So when you first learned about where you were going to live,
Yes.
Reading, did you think it was called Reading?
I didn't, but that's because in Pennsylvania, we have a Reading, Pennsylvania.
Ah,
So yes, almost anywhere on the East
Damn.
Coast, we've stolen most of our names from Europe,
Yeah.
and at least in Pennsylvania. I mean, so York is very close to Lancaster. Some people say Lancaster. I don't think that's correct. It's Lancaster. But then we also have East Berlin and New Oxford right next to each other. So we've stolen everything from Europe.
cherry picked. My second dumb question, have you tried Monster Munch?
Monster? No, I have not. What is
Oh my
Monster Munch?
goodness. Monster Munch is a corn-based snack which is a bit iconic in the UK, and I can't believe I might have to take you to a shop in a minute before you head back. I know you're going in like 2 weeks, so I'm going to have to get you one of each flavour of Monster Munch.
Yeah.
There's pickled onion. Yeah, I know.
Pickled onion corn. Delicious.
Yep. Wait till you try it. And flaming hot.
I'll go for
Yeah.
that for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, we'll sort you out.
Cool. Lovely.
I'll stretch the budget. It's fine.
Yeah. We'll go halvesies.
Yeah. Well, no, I think you might be back sooner than you think. Once you've tried these, you won't be able to resist.
I won't even leave.
Now, I want to ask you about the tree stock and what we might term, inverted commas, native species in the two places. So, of course, if we think true tree time, like 350 million years, continents colliding, moving around,
Yes.
trees expanding and contracting in population, and very much shaped by the landscape, the soils, the geology, the mountain ranges, restricting how frivolously seeds and trees might spread across different landscapes.
Yes.
And as I understand it, the UK has a lot less types of tree
Hmm.
because it's obviously an island that has been separated from the major continent of Europe, though it still might have pollen coming across. An oak tree, for example, might have pollen from as far away as Iran. And so, yeah, that's really interesting to me that the US have, in theory, a lot more different types of tree, but therefore like a lot more tree issues to manage. But yeah, so how do you view that situation? And I suppose in a future sense, a need to remain a little bit malleable in what we consider appropriate species here. Yeah, what were you thinking about?
Yeah. So I have a pretty strong answer to this. So I'll say I'm representing myself. I don't want to say this is the view of, whatever university I've been at or the company I work for. But I think the way that we define invasive species currently is pretty poor. So in North United States, we say any species that wasn't there prior to Christopher Columbus arriving and that either causes ecological or economic harm. That is how we define an invasive species. Now, I mean, while it's healthy to have a definition and some goal to work towards, I think it's also a pretty silly definition. But th- when it comes to native and non-native species, and it comes to tree planting and thinking about the future of them, I absolutely think that we need to be very malleable. The idea that we can only preserve what we have recently seen as humans and try to keep it in that small structure, I think is a bit short-sighted. As you mentioned, from a geological time standpoint, at one point, we were one continent, and then slowly over time we broke apart. The major problem is that because of globalization, we are moving species around the world on a daily basis. So we are bringing species together in a much faster time period than geology would have previously allowed for. So, over these long periods of time, species would have been able to adapt to each other. If there was some new interaction, it would have been a very slow process. So, yeah, that is problematic now. But, the idea that we shouldn't consider with the way that the world's changing from, a warming climate, there's going to be many species that could thrive here in England and many species that are what we consider native here now that may not thrive. The speed at which that is happening, I can't fully say for sure, but something like, a beech tree. In North America, we have beech forests in South Carolina where it's extremely hot, extremely humid. And that goes the whole way up to Canada and into Maine, which is, pretty far north. So the plasticity of, the genetic profile of this one species is pretty great. So I also don't want to short sight trees. I think that, they're actually pretty darn good at surviving and that we shouldn't just write them off either. So I think a hybrid approach of, considering what species can we plant? A Persian ironwood, Perodia. It's an amazing, gorgeous tree. And it does really well in the urban environment. We know that it has a lot of features like it's very drought tolerant. I think this is a species that we should consider planting here. We have great examples of it around the world of it being an urban tree. I could stay here all day and give you a list of trees that I think are going to be great for the future in the UK or for North America or for wherever. I'll spare you that. But I do think, we should be looking at the native provinces, looking for those, being able to plant them into the forest and the urban environment, but also thinking about what other species could be planted. I do think we need a lot of screening. Could this species become an invasive species and take over a forest? We do need to be more careful than just planting it out there. Looking at the biology, is it dioecious? Can we only plant males? That sort of thing. But yeah, I think a good hybrid approach.
I always think that there's probably a lot of examples of things growing in this country in botanical gardens and such, which we can learn from those actually and see how they're doing and how they might be impacting the local environment or how difficult they might be to manage. And we should take our cues from some of those too. I just want to say on record, like I've really enjoyed kind of getting to know you through our collaboration. I collaborate with a lot of different people and working for big organizations or well-established ones, that can be sometimes a bit clunky to kind of get things going and align values and such. But genuinely, it's only just been a pleasure. And I think that the way my National Trust colleagues in different gardens and places have responded to the project is kind of testament to the energy you've brought to the space and that enthusiasm, Kevin. So a big thank you. And I know it's not the end as well, but you're going to be going back to the US, and I hope we can stay in touch.
We will absolutely stay in touch. And again, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been so lovely working with you and with the National Trust and having access to these amazing sites with deep history and some, if I must say, some really amazing trees.
Yeah, and I'm in no rush to hear the conclusive outcomes, but yeah, excited as well to learn where we get to with that. Even if we end up with really clear evidence saying, do not mess around with worms, let them do their thing.
Sure.
Yeah, that'll still be useful. Okay, so we're coming to the end of the interview, and it's the time now where I hand over to you to say what would be your final message for our listeners today.
Well, first, again, thank you, Tom, for the opportunity to talk about earthworms and trees. It's been really lovely. My message to all of you out there, we as tree people, we're always looking up. We're always saying, look how beautiful that tree is. Look at the structure, look at the leaves, look at the flowers. But really, one of the things that we should be doing as tree people is looking down at the ground. The soil is so important. If we are good tree caretakers, we should be good soil caretakers. So while you're looking up, please also look down.
You've been listening to the Meaning of Trees podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, share, leave a comment and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And see you next time.